Unlike nearly everywhere else in the region, it actually rains in Iran, where people live, and that changes everything. Sitting at the crux of Eurasian trade for thousands of years, Persia was ancient Greece's existential threat. Carthage and Phoenicia traded, raided, and warred with Rome. The Moorish conquest of Spain, the Crusades, the Silk Road, the spice trade, the Ottoman Empire, the Age of Empire, the scramble for energy, the global war on terror. This region is a central piece of the West's collective cultural history. Another reason is money. Before deep-water navigation, much of the trade between Europe and Asia relied on routes through the Middle East. For the relatively short historical period of steam travel and coal, the region languished until the discovery of oil. The dissolution of empires and the massive injection of wealth into countries built literally on sand made everyone who relied on fossil fuels a party to the sometimes violent disputes that still define the region today. The American-led order has kept most of these disputes limited to a slow burn. As the United States started to step back from the world stage, the Middle East was the first to descend into disorder, and the region has precious little in the way of stability to look forward to. Part of why the Middle East always seems so chaotic is that it's next to impossible to establish continuity. It comes down to water, or more accurately, the lack thereof. What rain the region receives occurs seasonally in a scant handful of highlands, most of which are too steep to be particularly useful as living space. The resulting streams and rivers follow narrow courses with minimal downstream inflows. Miss those, and oases are the only other water source. Nearly all the region's agriculture must be irrigated, and most of its population clusters tightly around whatever water is available. On the Levantine coast, in Mesopotamia, along the Nile, at Mecca, at the Damascus oasis, and so on. Dictated by that most essential of resources, this settlement pattern forces a base, visceral competition upon the region. One seasonal hiccup in the delicate water supply, civilization falls apart. The nature of the region's terrain doesn't help. Nearly all of the Middle East is flat, open, arid lands, or hard desert. Throughout, there are painfully few geographic barriers a culture can hide behind. Desert communities can fall with a single raid. Coastal communities can be subjugated or wiped out by a single foreign vessel. Oasis cities can be besieged and starved. It doesn't take a horde to sweep across the flats of Mesopotamia and force a flag change. Checkpoints like Istanbul sit at maritime and/or land-based crossroads, attract a lot of attention, and tend to change hands from time to time. Direct rainfall enables agriculture without necessarily requiring irrigation. Lower labor requirements free workers to do other things, like going to school or practicing a trade, or composing a poem or waging war. Culture here has roots stretching back 5,000 years. Mountain living has other advantages. Anyone wanting to invade Iran must fight their way uphill into the Persian core and batter through every single mountain line. This defensibility shapes Persia's participation in international affairs. Iran isn't a destination, but instead a knot of difficult territory that must be bypassed by those in Asia or Europe who want to trade with each other. Since passing through Persia is so difficult, trade in all areas tends to flow around Persia whenever possible, preferring either the dangerous, open, pirate-ridden seas of the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, or the flatland routes through brigand-rich Central Asia. The only exception is the Silk Road. Persia did play host to one major route. From the Central Asian steppes and deserts, traders would enter Persia from the northeast and drop down to Persia's coastal strip on the southern shore of the Caspian Sea. It's the only flat green place in the country. Such trade came into Persia's sphere of influence, enabling the Persians to take a big fat bite out of it, but did so without unduly undermining local culture or establishing economic dependency or strategic vulnerability. Unlike the dozens of city-states and empires that have risen and fallen throughout the Middle East, the Persians have art and history and culture that isn't short-lived or incidental or fused with foreign practice, but instead anchored in millennia of continuity. The Persian language and Persian customs, conservatively, date back hundreds of generations. Persian continuity enabled a local economy far more sophisticated than the pearl harvesters of the Persian Gulf's southwestern shore, or the caravan towns of the Syrian interior, or the grunt farmers of Mesopotamia or the Nile. No one-horse town, the Persian economic system is thick with variety, literacy, and technical skill. The Persians don't simply look down on their neighbors from their mountain fastness. From time to time, the Persians boil out and conquer them all. At Persia's maximum historical extent, it absorbed most or all of contemporary Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Kuwait, Jordan, Syria, Israel, Lebanon, Egypt, Turkey, and Bulgaria, along with big bites of Uzbekistan, Libya, and Greece. The Persians have had their highs and lows, just like everyone else, but most notable is the fact that the lack of local competition meant that the Persian empires of the past didn't so much rise and fall as expand and contract. Only on rare occasions did the Persian core itself fall. Today, the Persians are under only their seventh governing system since the rise of the Achaemenid Empire. But that Achaemenid Empire first rose 26 centuries ago. These folks have some serious staying power. Backstopping Persian sophistication was the need to deal with the heterogeneous nature of the Persian population. Everywhere else in the world, successful, cosmopolitan, thriving cultures never emerge in mountainous terrain. Persia is an oddity largely because the lands around it are even worse. Tiny patches of useful land in the inner Caucasus zone to the north, hard desert to the northeast and east, the invasion corridors of Mesopotamia to the west, the desiccated canyon lands of inner Anatolia to the northwest. There isn't much competition. Being an exception forced the Persians to develop tools to mitigate the fact that each and every one of their 1,000 mountain valleys has its own cultural identity. The early Persians were the original multiculturalists, in that they maintained a relatively loose definition of what Persian meant, making it possible for neighboring groups to be admitted into the Persian whole. The most recent evolution of this concept is today's term Iranian. Persian is an ethnicity, while Iranian is the nationality. Arabs, Kurds, Turkmens, and more consider themselves Iranian, despite being of different ethnic background. The relative success of Persian lands compared with the desert communities around them added to the attraction. The Persians aggressively promote interaction among the mountain valleys they control. Internal trade, economic dependence relationships, and intermarriage all deliberately and successfully blur the differences among the various valleys into a fluid Persian norm. Persia always maintains a huge intelligence apparatus, whose primary rationale is to keep tabs on all its myriad sectarian groups. Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims, Baluchis, Azeris, Arabs, Jews, Turkmens. All and more live somewhere in Persia, and even more groups under the Persian roof in times of imperial expansion. The intelligence authority's primary purpose is to provide the state with insight as to where an internal trade route or bribe or arranged marriage might be useful for national unity. Sometimes the information gleaned necessitates beating the crap out of groups that refuse to see the world from the Persian point of view. Since antiquity, the Persians had maintained a massive army relative to their population. In essence, the Persian army occupies Persia to preserve the ideal of national unity. That such an army can be used for other things has enabled Persia to be one of the world's largest empires at multiple times throughout recorded history. It has proven a wildly successful mix. Persia is the only component of the ancient world to survive through the classical era and on to the post-classical era with any real continuity. In modern times, it all went to pot so painfully quickly. Populated Iran is a fused, sprawling mountain system. Iran's Zagros mountain chain fills the country's entire southwestern third, while the Elburz dominates the northern third. The contemporary capital of Tehran sits on a plateau where the two chains meet. With an average peak elevation of 10,000 feet, the two chains not only force out fairly reliable rainfall, but their valley floors tend to be above 3,000 feet.